Welcome to, I don't know, what should we call this, between a fern and a fake plant? I don't know. At Gotham Sound. Our guest today, I'm very excited to introduce, is Karl Winkler from Lectrosonics. Hi, Karl.
Hi, how are you? Glad to be here.
So I'm super glad that you're here too, because you guys have new products to talk about, and then also we can catch up on FCC stuff.
Sure enough, yeah, we can talk about that.
Awesome. So tell me, what do you have?
Sure, well, the Venue 2 is our newest receiver platform, and it's similar to Venue in that it's a 1RU, modular platform with up to 6 channels in one frame. So it's very compact in a rack or on a cart, that kind of thing. But what's different about it is that now we have modules that tune across 3 blocks, similar to our L series. So like the LR receiver, we have 3 block tuning modules that gives you up to 3,072 frequencies per module. And it's tracking filtered, kind of like the old VRT, but imagine a VRT, but tuning 3 blocks. That's the big news. The frame also can connect to your computer over Ethernet, which is a wonderful thing where we couldn't do that before. We also still have USB, which is kind of convenient for firmware updates, but you can also connect and monitor, which is what I'm doing here on my desk usually. And then it's got an infrared port as well. So with compatible transmitters, including the HH handheld, the L series, the LT, the LMB, the SSM, and another new transmitter we're going to talk about, the HMA, they all have an infrared port. So once you develop your frequency tuning list, you can very quickly send it into your transmitters. So it cuts down a lot on the time spent doing the transmitter settings. So a lot of great things in it, actually.
Yeah, I love the wideband, of course, and we'll get into why that's important with the FCC stuff.
Sure enough,
But
absolutely. Yeah,
I love the Ethernet port.
yeah,
I think it's got huge potential to be able to remotely monitor installations, or if somebody's having an issue, we as a dealer can go in and log in. We can set up routers that could bypass their network, for example, and we could log
sure.
directly into it. And then also facility-wide. Somebody who has a bunch of different venues can monitor and control them from a central location.
That's
So,
right. And you can even connect 2 different computers to a venue stack at once, which is kind of a nice feature. I was talking to one gentleman who was looking to install these and wanted to have one connection that's simply for monitoring at a remote location, and then another connection that's used to update any settings. So that's another handy thing that you can do. I mean, Ethernet does give you a lot more power than USB ever did. So yeah, it's a nice thing.
yeah. The one feature, and I'm sure I'm not the only person to say this, I wish it had built-in Dante.
Well, sure. Yeah, we've had a lot of requests for that, and we're working on some new stuff that I can't talk much about, but we're Dante savvy here, and that's about all I'm going to say. But we made the decision that to speed up development and to not spend a whole bunch of money. I mean, it's already more expensive than an older venue, so we thought, look, we don't want it to have it jump up to be twice as expensive, that kind of thing. So we figured, let's come out with a product we know that will do well. It's a great performing receiver. But yeah, we understand Dante. We know where you're coming from.
Yeah. And then I think I'm going to steer us on a little bit of a tangent.
Sure.
With Dante would come some kind of open control protocol, so that I can control my venue from a Yamaha console, or from maybe a Sound Devices CL12 control surface. Is that also on the drawing board, to the extent that
Yeah.
you can talk about it?
To the extent I can talk about it, that's something we're looking at, definitely. As long as the control over Dante layer is working, we can exploit it. Absolutely.
Fantastic. That's great news. That's good. And so I guess the fact that it's wideband does sort of naturally lend us to talk about why it's important in 2016 to purchase wideband gear.
Sure. Well, wideband's something that people have asked for a long time. And I would say we're almost never the first company to adopt any sort of new technology. We're more of a conservative company that is delivering products that are going to perform well in any environment and last a long time. So we're often late to the game with anything like this. So a lot of clamor for wideband came a couple of years back, and we started looking at it, and we realized, there's some fairly significant trade-offs. The wider window that you have for your front end means that it's going to see a lot more TV channels and a lot more interference potentially. So we thought, well, let's take a long, deep look at this problem and see what we can come up with. And actually, interestingly enough, the first development was the LR receiver, which was in a way an experimental platform to say, this is designed to be a small camera mount receiver and tune wideband, but we better figure out how to manage that issue with interference. And so we did it in the LR. So what we came up with is a way of doing tracking filtering even in a tiny product like that. Now with Venue 2, we included the tracking filters as well, but we went one step further, figuring that this is going to be used in a lot of multi-channel applications. It's going to be used in high RF environments, up to 48 channels or more. So we developed IQ filtering. And if you would, I'd like to bring up the graphic that shows potential interference. I think it is called wideband noise, if you can show that on the screen, to kind of show what it looks like when a three block wide receiver sees the background noise.
Yes, Jared has it up now.
Okay, so what you see there is, again, a wideband receiver seeing a whole bunch of TV stations, right? And you can kind of see the difference of power and bandwidth occupied when you see what says other wireless signals. Okay, that's the little RF carriers. The little tiny thin lines are the RF carriers. So the TV stations are these, multi-kilowatt transmissions that go a long distance. Meanwhile, we're talking about tiny little signals of 100 milliwatts or even down to 25 milliwatts in some cases. So they can't compete. When a receiver sees all these very strong signals, it is typically desensitized to your desired channel. And people run into that a lot. They say, I'm not really seeing anything on my scan, but my range kind of just went to hell. And the reason might be, a bad BNC cable on a video transmitter or other sources like that are nearby. So what we decided to do, and if you would, bring up the graphic that says IQ filter active. Okay. So what this is doing is when this receiver channel sees a desired signal, and it knows that that's true because it's not only the right carrier frequency, but the right pilot tone, which is proprietary to our products. What it's going to do is actually narrow the filter and attenuate further on that channel. If you see a strong desired channel, you don't need to have tons of sensitivity or gain on it. You can actually back it off. And what that does is not only, do you have the tracking filter itself that's filtering out the stuff, but you're tightening up the Q and you're lowering the gain on the channel, so it's going to do an even more effective job of blocking out background noise. So that's what we put into the Venue 2 modules, the VRT2.
There's one for each module, so there's 6 of these per Venue frame if you populate it with all 6 modules. So this is going on for each individual receive module.
Exactly right. This is, in a way, tracking filters on steroids. There's always been tracking filters, one per module, that's following around the channel that you choose and blocking out out-of-band information. People are familiar with that from the old, 210, the 411, and so on, products like that. So now we have that in the VRT2, but again, with the addition of the IQ, the intelligent Q filtering, that is an active dynamic, filter. So it adds, again, a layer of backing out rejection noise.
I mean, it's fascinating to me because it took me a while, and still does sometimes, to wrap my head around, with RF, oftentimes less is more. So this idea of dynamically attenuating the signal, sounds a little scary. Like, what do you mean you're lowering my input? But really, that helps out the receive circuitry tremendously. It's like not overdriving a sensitive mic preamp.
Exactly right. It's another form of gain structure, and it is often misunderstood. A lot of times people feel that to quote-unquote increase range, I'm going to put RF amps behind my antennas, my receive antennas. And that's not the right reason to choose RF amps. The reason to choose them is to overcome loss in cable. So if you have short cables and high gain antennas like LPDAs, the shark fin type antennas, you don't need RF boosters. That's actually going to hurt performance rather than enhance it. So yeah, a little bit of loss is always preferable, almost always preferable to too much gain.
It's great, and to have each module be able to do that, I have a better understanding now of what's going on behind the scenes in the product. It's great. It's fantastic.
Sure enough. Well, while that graphic is up, I'm going to go ahead and move my camera to show us the front panel of Venue 2. So stand by. I'm moving the camera. I don't have a sophisticated setup like you guys. I got to have this little webcam.
Look closely at the picture I sent you.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. You should be able to switch back now to my camera. And what we'll see there is the front panel of Venue 2, along with the original Venue. You guys getting that picture okay?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, fantastic. So as you can see, the display for the new one is much larger, much higher resolution than the old one. And for the camera here, I found that I needed to dial back the brightness of the LCD a little bit so that you could see it. Otherwise, it would look washed out on the camera. But very similar to old Venue, I can go in and look at any particular channel in detail, and that'll give me the frequency information, other settings, the battery for that particular channel, and so on. It's got a slightly different look to it, but this is a very similar device. Instead of a button that you push on it, it's more of like a jog wheel, but it's very similar in its function. And you notice we got the 2 buttons here and then the 6 buttons along the bottom. So in many ways, it should be very familiar. However, if you do go into the menu, you'll notice that there's a lot more to this. There's a lot more flexibility in how you set it up. You can look at your transmitter settings because now you can send them via infrared, as an example. And that's going to expand over time. Right now, it's a little bit the basics. It's going to send the frequency. It's going to send the compatibility mode. But over time, additional transmitter settings will be included. I think right now we do send the top switch information, like for the LT and the LMB as examples. So it does have, it automatically recognizes the modules, where on the old one you had to tell it to detect the modules. So now when I load modules in and turn it on, it already knows, oh, I've got 2 A1s, 2 B1s, and 2 C1s.
And Karl, just to be clear, this is not compatible with the old modules.
That's correct, and I'm glad you brought that up. So the modules and frames are not cross-compatible with old Venue. They will physically fit in there, which actually with hindsight we probably should have made it so they didn't fit at all. But they can be forced in there, which is, hopefully no one does that. It won't blow up or anything, but it will not work. The pinouts are different, and they're just a completely different design. So we can go in and look at a lot of different things. The Venue 2 has the Smart Tune function, which is a step-by-step process that picks our frequencies, and it involves turning on transmitters one by one. So it'll pick the first frequency with a scan, then tell you to turn on the transmitter. Then you do that, then it goes to the second frequency, and so on. Like the old one, it's got a scan function. You can lock and unlock the front panel. The new version has the brightness for the screen, where the old one did not. You can turn on antenna power right in the menu, whereas with the old one you needed to open up the lid and move some jumpers around, which is pretty archaic.
I'm really happy to hear that.
Yeah, that's a nice little feature as well. And then here's your network settings. It does have RS-232 for those doing installations where they want to have some kind of central control system that's going to turn the unit, change settings on the unit or so on. And then there's diagnostic panel and information about the unit. So it's a very rich display. It does take a little bit of getting used to, but there's a lot in there. And I encourage everyone to spend a little time scrolling through the menus and getting familiar with what's in there.
It looks very much like the Automix, the new SPN DNT, and those that line of products. Similar.
Exactly right. That's right. It's using the same display as the Aspen units, and it's also using, or a similar display anyway, and it's also using that sort of what we call a midnight blue finish. It's like a dark blue finish with a little bit of detail in it, and the curved front panel. So it's designed to look like a family with the encrypted digital wireless, which is similar, and the Aspen units, and also the DNT units, like you said, the Dante enabled auto mixers and routers and so on that we make.
And this is completely compatible with all of the SM transmitters. I mean, obviously you can't take advantage of the infrared stuff, but you can receive any of those signals, even though these receivers are wideband and those transmitters are relatively narrower band. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct. The SM series in particular, which is a very popular product in our line, is completely compatible here as really anything we've made in quite some time. This is compatible with the 200 series, compatible, with IFB systems. You can put it in the different modes like you could with the original Venue. So the native platform is digital hybrid, which is the companion-free audio design that we have. And so, yes, it's natively compatible with any SM series, LT, LR, SSM, HH, old UH400, plug-ons and everything. Absolutely.
And what about the enhanced receive modes where it combines two modules? Does that exist in the Venue too?
It does. You're talking about the diversity modes.
Yes.
So exactly right. Similar to the original Venue, where you could go in and put it in different modes. The Venue 2 does that as well. So kind of the standard mode that I would say 90+% of everybody uses is what's called antenna phase switching diversity. And it uses a single receiver module, but two antennas, and it changes the phase of one of the antennas depending on which combination gives you a stronger signal. So Venue 2 does the same thing. That's how it's natively set up, or that's the default setting. However, with both the old and new Venue, you can put it in what's called ratio diversity mode, and what that allows you to do is use two modules to receive one channel, and it's going to be looking at phase combinations and the difference of signal strength between what each module sees, what each module antenna sees. So it's very sophisticated. We believe it to be the best possible diversity scheme, and it's power that isn't always necessary. But if you find that you're running into some multipath dropouts and issues there, ratio diversity is the way to solve that.
And I've seen the way people use it is, not everybody needs all 6 radio mics at the same time. So if you have a scene with 2 or 3 people, you put 2 heroes in the ratio diversity mode. And then, the others just in sort of regular phase diversity mode.
Sure, you got your money channels and your regular folk. Exactly.
Yeah.
Makes sense. Now, you brought up something a minute ago that I want to cover in a little bit more detail. And to do that, I want to show you Wireless Designer software. So I'm going to go ahead and switch view if that's all right.
Yep.
And let's see here. I'm going to share my screen. Okay. So now you should see Wireless Designer.
Uh-huh.
Okay, so for those that aren't familiar with this, let me go through it very quickly, but then I'll get to the detail that I wanted to tell you about. What the software does is it uses the receivers to scan the local environment. And don't forget that a receiver platform like this with its antenna system will show you a different scan than what a spectrum analyzer sees that is not connected to this antenna system. The reason for that is our kinds of receivers are actually quite a bit more sensitive than a typical spectrum analyzer. Spectrum analyzers are designed to see over a very, very wide bandwidth, and ours are a far narrower bandwidth. So we can get much greater sensitivity within the band that we're operating in. The other thing is that when you're looking at a scan with our receiver system, it's also seeing the intermods that have been generated within our antennas and our receiver. And any antenna system, particularly an active one, and any receiver is susceptible to have intermods generated within it. And so, especially with strong signals, and that's where it comes back to the thing about a little bit of attenuation is always preferred to too much signal. Some models out there will actually, or some brands have receivers that will actually show you an RF overload light to keep you from doing that.
Right.
Ours typically don't do that. They have a very, very robust front end, and that's typically not needed for the kinds of levels that we're seeing. But nevertheless, a receiver does generate some intermods within it, and so looking at this scan will tell you if that's happening. So now what I can do is export this frequency coordination, export this scan information to frequency coordination, and we'll go ahead and do that. And then we'll look here, and you'll see that, oh, I have it all zoomed in. You'll see that that actual scan data is now visible within our coordination engine. And we can see that we've got a band A1, we've got a couple of those, we've got a couple B1s and a couple C1s. Then, nothing in D1, which is not even really legal in the United States. So what I can do from here is have this system mathematically calculate those frequencies for those channels. I've already done that. That's why we see the green LEDs up here and this report that says no conflicts. What's neat about this is I can move these around, and we will rapidly see that the intermods, which are these little orange spikes, the intermods begin to move around. This is the mathematical relationships between the different channels.
It's great to see it in real time, so you really get an understanding of why that happens.
Exactly right. So this can even be a training tool to hit home exactly what is going on. So that means that I could change this one channel here and probably drop it, if I was playing around with it, drop it somewhere that causes problems for other channels as well. And that's the nature of intermods, phantom frequencies that are created within your own system, between your transmitters or between inside your receiver or your antenna systems, or with other equipment that's on site. Okay, so from there, we can deploy these channels to our receiver this way. And now the receiver is actually tuned to those frequencies. We'll come back to this window, and this is our monitoring window to look at all channels. I've only got 6 loaded in this system, but over here you can see that we could have up to 99 frames loaded on this software, which should be more than what anyone could ever use. You never know. So what I want to say though is you can go in and look in detail to this receiver, give it a name, put it in a group. Here's where you decide the diversity that you were talking about earlier. It's just right here. We can enable Talkback for those transmitters that have that, such as the HH handheld, the LT, the LMB. Any one of those can be used for Talkback function.
And Talkback, it's an interesting function. It allows you to route the audio to a separate output. Is that right?
That's correct. You can choose which output where you want it to go. In fact, if we were to enable it here on this channel, then we tell it which output we want that to be routed to. In the old venue, we had Talkback, but it would always be routed to the next open slot, and you had to have an open slot, a slot without a receiver module.
Which meant pulling it out of the rack and rearranging the modules.
That's right. And with this one, you can simply tell it which output you want it to go to, and it will just go right past that module, whether it's installed or not.
I want to go into a little bit more detail about this feature, just because it came up earlier, which is, say you're on-air talent and you want to talk privately to the control room. With the HH, there's a button that you can push, and with it enabled in the venue frame, my audio would then, as long as I have that button pushed, go to a separate output, which presumably could be routed to an intercom or to a speaker in the control room or something like that.
Absolutely. That's exactly what it's for. And, I just realized, I've got some LTs sitting around here, so I can very quickly set one up, because I want to show you how it looks on the screen too, because it's kind of a nice feature for people who do want to use it. And a lot of times it's, a lot of different people think of different ways to use it or why they would want to use it.
Yeah, so I've seen people queuing walkie-talkies with it, two-way radios as well. I mean, you really, it's your imagination that is the only limit with this kind of a feature.
That's exactly right. So in the transmitter, what you do is you tell the transmitter what you want the programmed switch to do. So on an HH type, there's a little black button kind of right behind the display, and it's a momentary button, but you can have it be a mute, which latches electronically. You can have it be the power button to turn the unit on or off, or you can put it in talkback mode. On the LT and LMB type transmitters, there's a little switch on the top of the unit, and again, it's a programmable switch. You tell it what you want it to do, and then it can behave as talkback. So I'm going to go ahead and put this LT into that mode, and then I'm going to use infrared sync to pick up the frequency. Let me do that now. And by the way, from this detail view of this receiver that I was showing you before, I can skip to the next one and to the next one right in here. I don't have to exit out and go back out to a different one. So it's kind of nice. So what I'm going to do here is now I'm in this one. It's a block 23. I've got a B1 transmitter. So now to do the infrared, I come up to my transmitter tab. I tell it that I'm going to send the settings to the transmitter. So what this is going to do is send the frequency and operating mode to my transmitter. So I clicked on it, and then the transmitter tells me that it's done. And let me verify that. Yes, it's on the correct frequency. So now, yeah, okay, I see Talkback works on the transmitter, and I'm going to go back to the receiver. I'm going to enable Talkback, and I'm going to say my output channel is number 4, which is a different one than this. So now when I close, we'll see this. Oh, I need to turn on the transmission first, or it won't work. Excuse me one second. Basics, right? Is it plugged in? Is it turned on? Okay, now we're transmitting. Okay, so now we see on this channel, because I've transmitted and I'm on the right frequency, that I got my RF link light, the blue LED, and I got a nice strong signal. A nice thing about the way this monitors is that it gives you 10 seconds of history. So what I just did is I detached the antenna, and you can see the strong dropout there. Okay, now it's leveled off to a lower level because now the IQ filter has engaged. So if I start taking it further away, look at that, I just moved it further away and it picked up strength. Interesting, it's like the reverse of what you would think. Now if I engage Talkback, what it does is it turns that channel white to tell you that it's gone into Talkback mode. So my output is not coming from that module anymore. It's coming from this one where it says TBO, Talkback output. So again, I turn off Talkback, and I'm back to my main channel, turn on Talkback, and I see it indicated here. So there you go. There's Talkback for you.
That's great. That's a great feature.
All right, so I'm turning off the transmitter. You'll see that the signal disappeared, and it knows the signal's gone. So we're back to the low noise floor, courtesy of the frequency coordination engine that found these nice clean frequencies for us. And of course, we're in Albuquerque, New Mexico, so it's a lot easier than it is in Manhattan to do that.
But I imagine that the intelligent attenuation is also going to come in handy as RF over fiber and other kind of systems like that, and distributed antenna systems come into play for users, where before you were sort of balancing the RF level for the entire venue frame. Now each module will intelligently go in and find its own correct level so that you don't have to worry about saturation.
Absolutely, yes. When RF level isn't the problem, this is definitely your friend. You know, and it's a way of keeping everything else out and your signal nice and solid, and no more than it needs. It's like the race driver Juan Fangio, one of his things about winning the races was to only drive fast enough to beat the next guy, not too fast, because then you could blow up your engine.
Two quick questions about
Sure.
the software. One is, can it run offline? Does it need to have a venue frame to do coordination?
It does need a venue frame to do coordination, but you can build a system and put in frequencies. No, I'm sorry, you can do frequency coordination without the venue attached. You create a new system, you populate it with the blocks and modules that you think you need. It will actually do a frequency coordination, but it doesn't know what the scan information is. However, you can save scan information and import it as well. So true, you do not have to be live to do that stuff.
But you do need a venue frame to get the scan data into it.
That's correct. Or scan data from another venue frame at some point.
Okay. And what about scan data out of it? If let's say I'm used to using software like IAS, can I export a CSV from the software?
Yes, you can export and import. That's actually a new feature that's going to be in the next rev. And I just saw it the other day. It's working well. You should be able to import a CSV and use that for custom frequency data that's not within your own system, as an example.
So I'm just going to do a shout out to gothamfaxes.com. So you could use this venue frame and create a CSV and then upload it to our sort of repository that we're maintaining of frequencies around the world, and it would populate in the database.
Yes.
So that's great
That's
news.
wonderful, and thanks for doing that service. By the way, that's a great resource for people.
Thank you.
Okay, so
Well,
one other thing I wanted. Oh, go ahead.
sorry, no. I just wanted, because we're getting some questions on the live stream, and I just want to address one of them from Event Sound. He or she says we need this for iOS, which I think is absolutely, and Android as well. So, any plans for that?
It is already iOS compatible. It's on the Silverlight platform, so that question is answered. Not for Android yet. It's something we're considering.
Fantastic news. Great. All right.
So one last thing I was getting to mention here was that, since there's thousands of SM series transmitters out there, I'm sure many of your customers have them. This system, even though it'll tune across 3 blocks, you can actually tell it to choose a narrowband transmitter, and it will only coordinate within the block that you choose.
Sweet.
So, for instance, within A1 band, I've got the 3 block choices here, 470, 19, or 20, that I can restrict it to, which is kind of a nice thing. So I just thought I would point that out, that it is definitely made in mind for the legacy products that are out there. It's backwards compatible. And I think that, you and your customers know us for a company that is always trying to the best of our ability, make things backwards compatible. So there's one example.
Yes. All right. It's great news, and it's great stuff, and it's clear they go hand in hand. Presumably, by the way, to get a hold of the software for iOS, is it through the Apple Store? Would we Google? Would we search the Apple Store for Lectrosonics?
Oh, you know what? I apologize. You said iOS, and I missed that. This is compatible for Mac,
Okay.
not iOS at this time.
Got
I
it.
apologize for the confusion.
No problem. All right. So that it's definitely a consideration to make it. So I think people will want to be able to take a tablet, like a iPad, or just have it on their phone.
It makes sense. Yes.
And because it's Ethernet driven, you could hook up a Wi-Fi router, and you'd presumably be able to get the same kind of response over Wi-Fi.
You should. It might be a little laggy, but yes, you should be able to get that connected. Absolutely.
Great. So you have was that all about the Venue 2?
I think we covered Venue 2 pretty well, unless there's other questions. And then the Wireless Designer software, that's something that you're free to download from our website and play around with it, get it loaded up. And there's instructions on our YouTube channel how to load it onto a Mac. It's a little bit more a few more hoops to jump through to get that to happen, but people are doing it. In fact, I saw a question on Facebook about it today. I replied with a link to the video. The guy said, I just installed it. It worked perfectly. So
great. All right, good. Nick Houston has a question. How does IQ work with multiple transmitters? Meaning, what if one transmitter is overloading the antenna while another is not? Will the one that doesn't need it be limited as well? I think because each module has its own version of intelligent attenuation, you'd be fine. Is that right?
That's correct. Yeah. In other words, this is happening in the receiver. So antennas are picking up all these different signals from all over, TV channels, wireless mics, everything. It's the receiver's job to filter all that stuff out and only pay attention to the desired channels. So when a receiver is tuned to a particular transmitter, it's knocking out everything else that is not that channel. That's the whole idea. And that's happening per module. So in a system with 24 channels, every one of those 24 modules is doing exactly that, only paying attention to its channel and filtering out everything else.
Good news. This is great news. I would love to talk VHF IFB.
Okay, great. Let me. I'm going to stop sharing now. I'm going to come back to the camera, which is going to show the front panels of the various gear, including the VHF IFB. And so this system is very much like our UHF system in that it is operated almost in exactly the same way, the same form factor. You've got your receiver here. It's going to look very familiar with the exception of the red knob and the red bezel to tell you that you've got VHF in your rack or on your Talent's body or whatever it might be.
Thank you for
But
that.
yeah, that was the idea of Kevin Parrish at NBC.
It's, it's great.
He
Of course it
he
was.
happened to, yeah, he happened to be here in the factory for a visit, and we showed him the proto, and he tested it here and everything, and requested, I want to get some of the first units. And then he said, but how am I going to tell the difference between this and my other units? Because the prototypes were the same as the UHF with the black bezel and the blue knob. So we hatched the idea of making them red, and the order was issued by Gordon, and it was done. So we thank Kevin Parrish for that idea, and it's resonated well with people, which is no surprise that to be able to visually identify it is a wonderful thing.
Yes.
So, but other than that, the unit is just like you're used to. It uses a 9-volt battery, and it's the same power it on, with the knob, headphone jack here. It functions identically, same rotary switches. And people have asked us, well, why didn't you modernize this? It's one of those things where, for one thing, we wanted to make this be a product that's familiar to everyone, so users worldwide can very rapidly adopt it. We wanted it to operate and be reliable. The receiver really has to be a bulletproof thing. This is not given to necessarily trained talent often. It's handed to people that tend to drop things. So we decided, let's keep the form factor the same until we come up with a new design that is as tough as this one. And that's not an easy thing to do. We also wanted to keep the cost manageable. If you compare this to, let's say, an LT transmitter, the LT is quite a bit more expensive. It's much more modern with a display, a new design. It's AA batteries, everything else, and it's more expensive to make as a result. So we wanted to keep the cost contained. So the transmitter, likewise, should be very familiar to people. The same exact form factor, the same display, and it operates almost identically. Of course, this is in the VHF band. Instead of a 25 meg wide block, it's actually 40 megs wide, which is fantastic. It's a lot of range to tune. It goes from 174 to 216 megahertz. And in that, we have 239 frequencies. So there's an enormous amount of tuning range and choices for frequencies. And the tuning steps are 175 kilohertz, which allows you could, literally tune them just 2 clicks away from each other, not counting for intermods.
Right.
So it's a wonderful thing. Of course, the antennas are different. That's one thing I want to talk about.
Mm-hmm.
The antenna that comes with the transmitter is I guess it's about 18 inches long with a center frequency just under 200 megahertz. But it's a 50 ohm antenna, BNC, just like the UHF version. So really, any antenna that is 50 ohm that is centered at about 200 megahertz would work well in this system.
People have been asking for a directional VHF antenna.
Right.
Is there anything that you're aware of that you guys are coming out with or that you recommend?
There's one that we're aware of. We've got some things in the works, but the one that we know of that's out there is the Radioactive Designs VF1.
Mm-hmm.
It's a good choice. It does work well. We've heard back from people, including, I believe, Kevin Parrish has used this antenna at NBC. It's big because it's VHF, so it's about 3 feet long. It's rather large and heavy. It's not cheap. I believe it's $1,200, something like that.
Yep.
But it does work. And so in terms of solutions that are available out there, it's a good one. And having some directionality helps, of course. People have asked us, too, about the 50 milliwatt limit on the new VHF IFB, because the UHF one is 250 milliwatts, at least in the U.S.
Correct.
So first of all, we want to say that this isn't our choice necessarily. We would love to put a little more power in there. But for the VHF band, that's the limit imposed on us by the FCC. The good news is that 50 milliwatts at VHF frequencies is very much like 250 milliwatts at UHF frequencies, because every doubling of the frequency means you need 4 times the power to have the same effective range. This is because of propagation of the waves. The longer the wave, the better the propagation. It's going to go around people and through walls and things like that much more easily at the longer frequencies. Excuse me.
Can
So, and yeah, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say the band split comes awfully close to the Phonak earwigs. Do you
Yes, it does.
are there any overlaps that we can use this system for the Phonak earwigs?
You can. There's actually 3 frequencies in the list that are compatible now. And apparently, listening tests, and maybe you've done this as well, but we've heard from a couple people that have tried it. They say it sounds quite good, that the compounder is a good match. So,
Yeah,
yeah,
we've heard that too.
you've heard that. So, yeah, I think you can use this just right off the shelf with a Phonak earpiece.
And is there a way to custom load new frequencies into the transmitter?
At this point, no. But with only quote unquote 239 frequencies, we may have some custom lists that will be added to firmware versions in the future.
Got it. Great.
So the hardware will do it. It's just a matter of picking which frequencies are important to add.
So in theory, if somebody came up with a Phonak-centric list, they could give you the list of frequencies and maybe at some point in the future get that preloaded.
Sure, yeah, our valued dealers such as yourself, we look for you to give us guidance in that area.
Great. All right.
So that's the IFB VHF, and one thing I want to mention is that with a whip antenna like the model that we send, the A170 AC, it's a quarter wave whip. It does require a ground plane to operate effectively. So just as with UHF, you cannot extend a whip antenna onto a piece of coax and have it work properly. You need a ground plane such as the chassis of the unit itself. Just want to mention that. Now, with an LPDA type antenna or a ground plane type antenna or those sorts of things, they have a ground plane built in. They don't need that. But a quarter wave whip antenna does need that.
Right.
So just one of those primers that I don't want to neglect.
And with VHF, the ground plane has to be a bit larger than UHF.
Yeah, the antennas in general are bigger physically and heavier and more expensive. So no doubt about it.
What else do you have to show, Karl, product-wise?
Yeah, okay. So let me move the camera. If you want, I'm going to move the camera back to me, and I'm going to show the HMA plug-on type, which is a wideband tuning. So if you guys want to insert a graphic for a second, I'm going to move the camera. Okay?
Yep.
Here we go. Otherwise, you might see proprietary secret stuff in the background when I move the camera around.
You're talking to us from the R&D lair, right?
Exactly. Or you would just see all the junk on my desk, which is... Okay, that should be... Let me just move it up. Okay, we should be good now. So I have with me HMA transmitter, and like the other products I've shown you today, there's a lot of similarities with its predecessor. This one is going to be used in almost identical way to the HM, with the exception that it has the 3-block tuning bandwidth. So there's the A1 band, B1 band, and C1 band, just like with our other products that have that tuning range. Like other recently introduced products, this one's got an infrared port right on the side. And so for quick setup, and we didn't forget to put a hole in the pouch. Because we sort of foresaw that, hey, what about those accessories? So the pouch is going to be modified, and when we start shipping HMAs, which should happen in February, we hope, pending approvals as always, that you'll be able to use it right away with the infrared. So that's one new feature, and it's labeled right on the side, IR port. The other new physical feature is the USB jack right on the other side here, which is accessed by the little rubber keeper. So there's your USB jack, and the idea there is that you can do firmware updates in the field with this unit like you can with the SSM and the L-series transmitters. So that's a handy thing. As these are updated with new features and so on, it's much easier to go out there and update it. So I want to show you the menu, and I turned off the backlight. I don't know if you can really see that. It's pretty tough. Almost.
Out of focus, but yeah, we got it. Yeah.
Okay, there we go. So what it's showing you is that it's the block and the code. Again, it's a 3-block tuning range. Of course, if I hit the frequency button, it's going to show me the exact, oh, the backlight came back on. Now it's impossible to see. But it's going to show me my frequency number, in this case 482.900. These do tune in 25 kilohertz steps to match, the modern equipment. So, a lot going on in this as well. But, for the average user, this is identical to use the way it attaches with the microphone and detaches. The menus are almost identical with a few changes to add the wideband tuning. It's AA batteries as before. You've got your quick setup with infrared port and updates with USB. So that's the HMA.
Fantastic. I'm going to loop back around to some questions that we have.
Okay.
Matthew Sonnenfeld says, why not add an IR to tune in the VHF IFB system? Could make setting multiple frequencies much easier than a toggle search. And then, the RX wouldn't need a screen. So that's a future feature request to be able to IR.
Understood.
One thing that's a little frustrating for me, and I'd love to see in a future IFB receiver, that the IR port would be nice, but also if you don't have a way to scan the spectrum in your IFB range, it becomes difficult when you're moving around from location to location to kind of know.
Yeah.
So some kind of RSSI indication or something on the receiver to sort of, how do I know I'm on a clean frequency without the transmitter on?
Yeah.
Would be nice.
Yeah, I think both of those can be addressed by, we are reviewing design proposals for updates to IFB in general, and that will happen at some point. The idea that, using the infrared, if you think about it this way, it's always going to originate in the receiver itself. So the receiver would need to scan to develop a good frequency, if you want to look at it that way. So it's got to have a display. It's going to be a little more sophisticated. And then it's got to be lighter and smaller than this one. A lot of people, when they saw the SSM belt pack transmitter as an example, oh, this is great, we love this. Can you get IFB into this size? It's about a third the size. It's a major challenge to get things smaller than they are. But it's all things we've been considering. We have one design proposal that shows some promise. We need to mock it up, make cases, play around with it, drop it, kick it, put the battery in, take it out 1,000 times, and do all the things that we have to do.
And invite Kevin Parrish back.
And then send it, invite him back or send it to him. And of course, we have other trusted advisors like that as well. So all those things it's kind of a cascade. It's a domino effect that, go, okay, let's put infrared on it. Well, but then it has to scan. So then it has to have a display. And then it has to, it's never simple. But those things are all on our minds. And it probably ought to have a two-way communication link over infrared. Or use radio for that, which is another can of worms that we've been reluctant to open, although there's plenty of research going on in the back rooms about that too. So.
I'll bet.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
And Nick Houston says, any drawbacks to using a multi-coupler with the VR2, I imagine?
Right, and no drawbacks at all. Multi-couplers are a part of any large-scale design. Our own unit, the UMC-16B as an example, would be a good companion. With these units, you can cascade up to 4 frames, so that's up to 24 channels without using any kind of multi-coupler. Some clever guys have run up to 6, and what they do is the first one has the frequencies at the outer edges, and then the next one is frequencies a little bit further inward and so on, further away from the edges of the passband. And by doing that, you can get up to 6 frames working, off a single set of antennas. But going beyond, 4 to 6, you definitely want to use a multi-coupler, and it works just fine with this system.
Great, good. Excellent. And Baldev about the HMA says, mention the line level in on the HMA.
The design of this is no different than its predecessor. It does have a 44 dB range. I'm going to check one thing here. Let's see, audio. Yeah, it goes down to 0 as prior units have. So it's got a ton of range, but there's no specific line input on this unit.
All right. So let's talk a little bit more generally then. There's
Sure.
VHF IFB, which, I think Matthew in the comments, points out maybe that's the future of IFB is VHF, or certainly one viable chunk of spectrum.
Absolutely.
There's wideband
Hmm?
receivers. All of this is because we need an answer to the tightening of the available spectrum for radio mic use. Is that fair to say?
It is absolutely fair to say. These are all designed as solutions to some challenge or problem that's out there. And clearly in the past 10 years, we've seen the UHF spectrum go from, pretty widely available to getting ever tighter. First was the sell-off of the 700 meg band, which took away about a fourth of what was available to us. And we're looking at another auction coming up later this year that's going to sell off probably a good portion, if not all, of the 600 meg band. So these are challenges that we're facing today with spectrum crowding, and it's only going to get worse. So a lot of these recent designs have to do with that. Again, back to the idea that everyone's been asking for wideband because it makes it easier. Wherever I go, I can find a usable frequency. Okay, but we knew that the spectrum is going to get more crowded than it is today. So you don't want something that tunes super wide that's going to have 20 TV channels in its passband. That causes problems. So we thought 75 megahertz is a good compromise. It allows us to very tightly control the front end design. And then adding IQ filtering in the case of Venue 2 gives you another layer, as I said before. So the idea being that, as this new auction comes along and we lose more spectrum, wideband tuning is important, but having really good front end design is going to be equally important to make sure that you can still get the performance that you expect from a system like this. And again, that's what Lectrosonics is all about.
There could be major economic areas that 75 megahertz is all you have of tunable spectrum, of usable spectrum.
It's possible. We sort of feel that the A1 band and the B1 band together are definitely going to cover everything that you're going to want to cover. Mm-hmm. So that's everything from block 470 up to 23. And some markets may have encroachment down into 23. But we felt that this is a good compromise again. And everything, the engineering compromise. This is the best combination of factors to get you that level of performance that you expect.
Where do we stand with the FCC sort of proceedings in the auctions? I know there's been some changes over the last couple of months. So can you give us an update? Can you walk us through some of that?
Sure. So just an overview really is that, later in this month, later in this year, probably mid-year, we're going to see what's called the reverse incentive auction. That's where they're going to determine the reserve value of the spectrum, meaning, what will the broadcasters want to either go off the air or repack to some other frequency? Once the FCC has that reserve price information, they're going to go with forward auctions and sell off the spectrum. And we're going to have what we have left with a few exceptions. They are talking about the ability for licensed users to be in the mid-band gap between the uplink and the downlink. But there's power level restrictions there and other restrictions that are going to make it, in my opinion, somewhat challenging and difficult to use for the average user. But there are people that, there's going to be equipment that'll work there. There's going to be ways of making it work. But it's a tiny amount of spectrum. We're talking about something like 4 megahertz, and that mid-band gap will be available to licensed users. So we still feel like all the good stuff's going to be down below 600, which, to answer your question that you said before, that's where the VHF comes in. If you don't have a super high quality audio critical application, then like IFB or COM, you can move that out of the UHF band and have a narrower deviation, a little bit less audio quality, more like speech quality. That's fine. And so that was the idea, coming back to what you said before.
And you characterize the VHF band like that because of limitations in terms of the spectral plot of the transmission and RF output power. Is that right?
Not necessarily. We tend to believe that you could very well get equal performance out of VHF, but because there's only 40 meg available, whereas in UHF there's going to be something like 150 left after the auction, it's still a fairly small piece of spectrum. Nevertheless, you could get very good operating quality, sound quality, as was done back in the old VHF days in the 80s and 90s. Those systems sounded very good. So it can be done.
Uh-huh.
It's more that, what are we going to use it for? You know what I'm saying? So typically, because of the practical antenna size, if you're using a belt pack transmitter on Talent, it's not going to be very practical to have a VHF antenna with current design philosophy. Of course, we're looking at antenna design as well as another thing.
Sure. Sure.
And there's a lot of great innovations going on out there. But that's mainly the thinking there is, what is it being used for today? What could we use it for without really changing the designs too much? And IFB and comm systems are the first things that come to mind.
Interesting. So, there's customers outside on the sales floor right now, and they're going to buy a wireless mic system, maybe two.
Sure.
What is the most helpful thing to them that we can tell them in terms of spectrum planning?
Sure. For those buying a new system, I would say you want to stay away from anything above 600 megahertz, just right off the bat, because it's going to be a relatively short. You're not going to get your return on investment. It's likely that these frequencies will become unavailable within the next 5 years, and perhaps shorter than that. What they're saying is that after the auctions are complete later this year, there's going to be a 39-month build-out process where the new infrastructure is built up to take advantage of that spectrum. 39 months is 3.25 years. So we're talking about between the end of 2016 and sometime in 2019 or 2020, somewhere like that. So, but you figure that, well, they're going to put up their antennas and infrastructure in the largest markets possible first, right? So that includes, for instance, Manhattan, Chicago, LA, right? They're going to look for the greatest return on their investment as fast as possible. So that could be within a year or two. So we could be talking about end of 2017 into 2018 to have to get out of that spectrum because it simply won't be viable to use your products there anymore. So back to, we recommend people stay away from anything above 600 if they're buying new. They should also be looking at stuff with a wide tuning bandwidth if possible, and stuff that is well designed, well filtered, like the equipment that we sell, of course, but we're not the only ones, but we want them to look at those kinds of things. What's occurring is, the value of wireless that works in the harsher RF environment is rising. So, it's more sophisticated design has to go into it. They have to be built with tighter tolerances, better specs to be able to give you that level of performance in the future. So, the systems we're selling now, Venue 2, L Series, these kinds of products are designed to get you through that 5-year transition. At the other end of that, it's hard for us to predict what's going to happen. But at least for the next 5 years, we feel confident that stay down in A1 and B1 bands, look at things like IQ filtering, tracking filters, equipment of this kind of quality, and you should be in good shape.
And move where you can, move down to VHF for IFB and comms.
Absolutely. Get your non-critical audio stuff out of UHF. Absolutely. So to leave room for the stuff that you absolutely have to have highest quality audio and best performance.
Right. Interesting. I can't believe it's been, it's a whole hour we spent, and I had a whole idea that I wanted to talk about, a little bit about how you got into audio and stuff, but I feel like we should wrap it up because an hour.
That's fine.
An hour is a long
Up
time.
to you. Yeah.
I do have one question. I happen, just because I'm curious. You are not from New Mexico.
Actually, I am from here.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, I grew up in Albuquerque, went to high school here, ended up going to college in Arizona and then college in Los Angeles, working in LA. Then I got a job with the Air Force Jazz Band out of Washington, D.C., and that's what brought me to the East Coast. Ended up working for Sennheiser for 8 years and then got the job with Lectrosonics in 2004. So it's been a whole round trip to go all over the country, both coasts, and then end up back here where we have, the beautiful mountain ranges and the clear sky and all that. So yeah, I'm glad to be home. And this is a great company to work for.
It's beautiful. All right. Carl, thank you so much for spending this time.
Had a great time. Thanks.
Carl, if you just want to hang out with us for a minute, I'll talk about next week's show, which is going to be Off Mic with Dana Feintuck. And as always, archives at vimeo.com/GothamSound. Check us out on Facebook and Twitter, and we welcome your ideas for future shows, which I think we have to get Kevin Parrish on here for a future show.
You should. Absolutely. Kevin's great.
Yep. Info@gothamsound.com. Thank you for watching. Thank you, Carl.
You're welcome. Thank you.
See you next week.
All right.